Thank you very much, Giacomo. Please join me in thanking Giacomo and John and Ilana for fascinating and, of necessity, very brief overviews of their work and ideas. Okay, I think we're moving into the discussion period. We've got about half an hour. We can use as much or as little of that as we like before moving on to the coffee break, which will start at 3:30 GMT time for 15 minutes, and then we will have our plenary talk from John Rogers at 3:45 p.m. GMT. So I open up the floor. I put a note in Zoom chat here. If you want to post any questions to Discord or use the Zoom Q&A or just type it into chat, we will monitor all channels, or we'll do the good old-fashioned unmute and just ask your question.
Josh, you can also include Anil if he's still around.
I think he's out of time. He may be here. I will let Anil type into chat yes or no whether he's willing and able to answer questions.
He's here.
Yeah, I'm here just for 15 minutes, but yeah,
minutes.
no, I'm happy to. But I already had questions, so
you did.
People that didn't have questions. Definitely.
You did, but you're one of our plenary speakers and you're short on time. So please, if anyone had any remaining questions for Anil, this is a great opportunity to ask him any questions. I hope the other three panelists will defer to Anil for a few moments if there are questions. Actually, I have a question for Anil, if that's all right. I'm interested in the census. How is it going from a sociological point of view? What sort of buy-in do you have from the public? What sorts of challenges are there above and, trying to run a scientific experiment at this scale?
Oh, thanks. I mean, it's I guess a little off topic for the meeting, but yeah, it's a real, I mean, the uptake has been really good. I mean, we've got, as I said, 25,000 people who've each done at least 40 minutes of psychophysics stuff, which is, it's not just filling in a questionnaire. So this is quite good, but it is very self-selecting as well. So the census is a little bit misleading because that's usually something people are forced to do to get a representative picture, but we can't obviously force the whole world to do this, much as I would like to. So it is a bit self-selecting, although we kind of, and that's one of the challenges, is how do we get this out to sample populations that wouldn't normally find this kind of thing appealing or interesting. So I found it really helpful to work with, it's been way out of my wheelhouse, working with proper marketing people and graphic designers. We were advertising it in the London Tube, which I think is probably a first for a psychology experiment, that there were, posters up in the London Underground. And you could tell that generated a lot of engagement just by sort of geotagging where people logged in from. You could figure that out. So it's going well. I don't expect it to be a massive highly representative coverage, but it's still going to be very illuminating. And of course, another restriction is all in English. So, all these interesting questions about how language might affect perceptual diversity, we can only touch on indirectly by sort of looking at countries where English might be spoken as a second language rather than the first. But yeah, thanks. Please do it, everybody. Please do it. So thanks. Another opportunity to plug it.
Absolutely. Actually, someone asked in chat about the London Underground, so there you go. Josie has a question for you in chat. I can read it if you can't see it, Anil.
Yeah, do you think there are advantages to providing robots with consciousness-like behavior? So I think it's fascinating. So, there's so much of this sort of hubris about whether we're building conscious machines or not. Are large language models sentient? No, they're not. And lost in this debate sort of is the question of, what are the advantages of building consciousness-like behaviors or the functions associated with consciousness into machines? And I think there are lots of advantages here, but also some dangers. So with Yoshua Bengio, for the last couple of years, we've tried to put in large grants, none of which have worked, which are trying to sort of bring together AI and consciousness research in a productive way. Because I think, as I mentioned in the previous discussion, consciousness does allow, at least in humans, strongly associated with lots of things that current AI is very bad at. So things like generalization out of a training distribution, learning from one example, flexible recombination of sort of past and present events, integration of many different kinds of information in a unified way, flexible guidance of action. Typically, these are things that are strongly dependent on consciousness in humans and perhaps other animals, as far as we know. So I can, and AI broadly construed, maybe not in this particular context, but certainly in the sort of deep learning dominated world of AI, is really bad at this kind of stuff. And so I think there's a lot of prima facie benefit in understanding how to implement these functions so that we get AI that can generalize better, that can be more context sensitive, that can recognize its own biases and things like that. Not that we're very good at that. We're actually pretty terrible at that, even though we're conscious. But the danger, of course, is that, well, there are two dangers. One is we accidentally build a conscious machine without realizing it, which would be an ethical catastrophe, as people like Thomas Metzinger very sensibly points out. It's not something we should be even trying to do, to actually build consciousness. So I'm kind of worried about the whole cerebral organoid business here. But I think the present danger that we're seeing already with large language models is that we are so susceptible to anthropomorphic biases and tendencies. We project conscious minds into things very, very readily. And we tend to do it on the basis of their apparent intelligence, not on their apparent consciousness. So I think we might end up developing systems which we have no good reason to believe are conscious, but which are sort of like optical illusions that, even though we know they're not, we can't help ascribing it that property. Even though we know two lines of different lengths, we can't help seeing them the same. So we might get this weird situation where we have apparent machine sentience that is somehow cognitively impenetrable. And that would be a very socially disruptive situation to be in. So, I always remember Daniel Dennett's advice on these kinds of things, which is, when it comes to AI, we should always remember that we're building tools and not colleagues.
Well put. There's another question for you, Anil, from Aaron in Zoom chat.
Yeah, if intelligence is a measure of successfully completing some tasks, and consciousness ultimately comes from a collection of control systems. Hold on, what's the question? Oh, yeah. Yes, exactly. So yes, no, it's possible. And I think we need to be mindful of this. But I think a big assumption, again, just to I didn't highlight it before, but there's this huge assumption that a lot of people hold, that consciousness is substrate independent, that you wire up some silicon stuff or maybe some some other soft robotic stuff in the right way and it will be conscious. I think this is a big open question. Nobody knows, honestly, nobody knows whether consciousness depends on the stuff something's made out of or not. I tend to think it might well depend on it because of some of the arguments I talked about. I won't rehearse now, but I think, being intellectually honest, it's not something that we can be certain about either way. So therefore, there is the possibility of accidentally creating synthetic consciousness, which I think would be, a massive disaster.
Thank you, Anil.
Can I actually ask a question as well? So how simple the computational part of the embodied intelligence or embodied consciousness can be for the concept of consciousness still to be possible?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't think there's a good answer to that. I mean, it's one of those really difficult questions about, at what point do the lights come on for a system, whether it's in synthetic things, in human development, in comparative biology. If you look at, is it there in a fruit fly or a worm? It's just impossible to say. Excuse me. I think. I mean, we know in humans that it takes quite a lot of neuronal hardware. In adult humans, you can get rid of the whole cerebellum and you can still be conscious. It doesn't seem to affect consciousness very much, but it tends to involve quite a big chunks of cortex and subcortex. So whether that's true, and how far you can generalize from that phenomenon depends on your theoretical commitment. If you buy into, let's say, integrated information theory, then almost none. Anything that integrates information, even minimally, will be conscious, minimally. But then other theories would set a different bar. global workspace would say, well, you need a global workspace, which has to be ignited and share information. It's not clear what would count as a minimal global workspace. So I can't answer that question. I think it's really important, but we don't have the tools to answer it.
There's a related or follow-on question from Aaron here directed to what I was talking about cellular level intelligence. You claim that you should look from the cellular level instead of the organism level, but do you not think that emergence results in things that uniquely exist at the organism level that we might benefit from? I would just repeat what Anil just said. There is an implicit bias, I would argue, in a lot of technical and scientific disciplines at the moment, that yes, there is something unique and there's a reason for focusing on the organism level. My view on this is to challenge that assumption. We can't rule out that there are, the building blocks or existence of things that we point to as sentience and consciousness, at lower levels, possibly the cellular level. We can't rule those out. And we need to make sure that our scientific theories about all these things encompass that aren't biased by the things that we tend to see in our everyday lives, which is the whole organism rather than the parts that it's made up from.
And just add to that very, very quickly, because there's one word in there which I think again is really important, which is the word emergence, which is another thing that often people ascribe somehow pseudo-magical properties to. But it's again something that one can get operational about, and there are interesting ways. This is one of the foci of my group at the moment, and others too, is to how do we quantify emergence in a non-spooky way, to really say when there's something, at least in the eye of a systematic observer, that is more than the sum of the parts. Because I think there are intuitive connections. There is a sense in which a conscious experience is more than the sum of lots of independent things going on, simply in view of the fact that it's unified. In the same way that there is something about a flock of starlings that's really flocking, that is doing something distinctive, that's not just flying around randomly. So I think we can quantify these things, but we don't I think it's wrong to sort of build them in from the ground up as necessary criteria. They're just useful mathematical tools for grasping at some of these intuitions, like how do we relate the micro to the macro. If we can find a principled way of operationalizing that, then we can see where it applies. I'm going to have to go now. Also, I'm really conscious that there's been met some brilliant talks after I finished, and I really don't want to monopolize this discussion. Just to say, it's been a while since I've heard talks in this community, and as Josh kindly pointed out, several centuries ago, we were both at Sussex together, and I was very much involved in this evolutionary robotics. That was my PhD originally, and it's a pleasure to hear about it again, to see it thrive so much, and thanks to the work of pioneers here, and just to see that, like that video of Dario Floriano's little self-recharging thing. I mean, half of my PhD was working on a simulation of that, so that just brought me right back to being, well, still at Sussex, actually, still geographically where I am, but temporarily a very far distance. So thank you. I'm sorry I've got to run, but wonderful conference. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you so much for being here, Anil. I think that's a perfect segue. There's a comment here from Erin and opening up her question to John and Giacomo and Ilana. Anyone want to take a swing at that?
Actually, maybe I was just, maybe I can ask you, Josh, what is the relationship between consciousness and awareness? Because when I was, Christoph Koch was my mentor when I was at Caltech, and he also used to interchange the terms consciousness and awareness when he was working on it. Or
I will put my cards on the table. I am a card-carrying illusionist. I don't believe in consciousness. It's a cognitive illusion. Daniel Dennett has spoken about this at length, and so I won't steal his thunder. I think it's awareness all the way down, and that hierarchical process is something that sometimes we refer to as consciousness.
Yeah. So in that respect, then even our chips might have some neural correlates of awareness if they are embodied, and if they have if we endow them with learning and they have experiences. So I think there is really a physical substrate that could represent awareness. It's just that it's going to be hard to find it and pinpoint it, whether it's a distributed thing, it's a localized. So, but that's fine, because they were asking explicitly for what we think, the people that work more with physical systems. That's my opinion.
What's Dennett's take on whether you can have awareness in a simulated system?
Oh boy. Let's see, how far down this rabbit hole shall we all go? Good question. I will return to your question, John, but I wanted to give you and Ilana a chance to chime in as well on all this.
I don't think I have anything particular to add to that question.
Ilana?
So are we talking about the question of consciousness? Where does it emerge? Or I got lost in the.
Aaron, you were the one poking the bears. So Aaron, why don't you unmute yourself, and if you're okay with it, please just ask your question.
It's quicker than typing. The question was, do you think there's any phenomena, so not just consciousness, that uniquely exists at that organism level, that say you guys at that like whole system level benefit from, that say Josh going down on the cellular level won't?
Yeah, I guess if I'm thinking about some emergent collaboration between the robot, well, it's hard for me to go all the way to the scale of cells. I definitely hesitate on that. But if we're thinking about what kind of emergence can be detected when a human and a robot physically interact, and the robot is kind of not kind of self-evolving creature, but kind of a pretty programmed creature that has a quite bulky physical body that is not soft like all the organisms that were discussed mostly in this conference. I think it's a matter of what kind of collaboration between the robot and the user can emerge, and whether at some point you won't be able to distinguish between this engineered system and a human collaborator. So you could imagine the system to be operated by an artificial brain or by another surgeon. Would they behave differently? And I think some interesting thoughts can come from this way of thinking.
Yeah, it's like an embodied version of the Turing test, right?
Yeah, exactly. So definitely.
So to respond to Aaron's question a little bit, I think one interesting contrast between working on robots and working on cells, if that's kind of what you were asking, is I'm going to harken back to kind of one of the founders of this field, Rodney Brooks, who makes this fantastic argument in his paper, I think it's Intelligence Without Representation, about how long it took life on Earth to achieve certain milestones, and the amount of time it takes just to get like autopoiesis, right, is measured in billions of years. And then from single-celled organisms to multicellular organisms takes hundreds of millions of years. And then kind of every milestone from there on takes substantially shorter amount of time. And then human level civilization is just the icing on the cake. And then the modern world is just the top layer of atoms on the icing on the cake of the timescales of the evolution of life. And the takeaway from that is the hard part is the self-organization. The hard part is just having a system that can survive in a real complex environment. And awareness, it really emerges from that whole struggle, if you will. And to poke at bears a little bit, I don't say this as a criticism, but when you start working with cells the way that Josh and Mike Levin are, you're cheating because you're relying upon nature to have already solved the really hard part, and then you can move on to the easy stuff. So I think it's amazing work, but I want to see us moving backwards in evolutionary timescales, and sort of chasing awareness down into, back in time, and engineering systems that are more primitive until maybe we can find where this threshold is for awareness.
So can I pick up on this point and actually kind of try to actually take the question that I asked Anil to Giacomo and John, and saying, well, if you would take the processors that Giacomo is developing and put them integrate them somehow with the bodies that John is is working with, what kind of intelligent and maybe conscious, I don't know, how would you quantify that for these systems, but maybe use some neuroscientific methods to study this creature that would be made, and what kind of behaviors could you guys develop if you were on such a creature?
I mean, optimistically, that sounds amazing, but I think, anything that could actually just persist in the world, like, I think aspiring for intelligence is really setting ourselves up for failure. But just being able to persist and sustain a system, an artificial system able to sustain itself, is already sort of a wildly optimistic goal.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that like John is saying, by cheating, by connecting the sensory inputs to our chips, and then connecting the output to the chips to the right motor units with the right connections, we could create something that might be able to survive, or not do anything crazy. But then again, if you would do some electrophysiology on the silicon neurons, you would find cells that respond to the various sensory inputs, or they are active when some motor command is being produced. So you might interpret those, like we could anthropomorphize, interpret those as being aware of some inputs, or aware of the fact that it's trying to produce an output. But in reality, it's a dynamical system that's just using neurons, artificial spiking neurons to evolve its dynamics and produce some behavior. But in the end, it's all synthesized by us, and then it's really reactive. It's possible to add learning and internal states and attractor networks that would remember the cues or the inputs. So it's possible to increase complexity, and at that point we would have to analyze the system and see if something could emerge that we could again anthropomorphize and believe or assert to something that is aware or maybe cognitive or intelligent. But
maybe also add movement. So definitely memory, learning ability, and also movement and physical interaction with the environment. I guess that would be quite an interesting organism, artificial one.
In fact, I just wanted to mention that. So I was listening to Josh Bach, who is an AI philosopher, in addition to being a descendant of Bach, of the Bach musician. And he was saying, I'm really for embodiment. I really, this conference is really well matched to what I believe is necessary to get cognitive behavior. But he was more pointing to simulation and simulated worlds, something that John was also asking before. And he was saying anything that can measure the effect of the output on its own world and its own environment. And at this point, it doesn't matter if the environment is a physical environment or a virtual or a software environment, but it needs to be something that can interact with the environment and measure the effect of its action on the environment. And in that respect, I accept his definition that something could evolve or produce cognitive behavior, even though it's not a physical system, if it's in a simulation or in a simulated world.
Bill, sorry, I saw you had a question there, but it got buried in my chat, my Zoom chat here. Did you want to just unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. It's just an observation. There was a question, what do we lose by dealing with individual cells rather than organisms? And I think one of the things we lose is evolution. In the organisms we have now, the genetic material is all pooled. Organisms evolve their collections of genes, whereas individual cells, they're part of the collective. So that was my take on what we lose by just considering individual cells. And I wondered whether people agreed with that or not.
Great observation. And I think that my opinion, these are the conversations to be having. I'm a collaborator with Mike Levin. I don't know if Mike or any of his members are here. I'm also a student of Mike Levin. And one of the things I've been learning is it's not just the genes. So if we're going to talk about inheritance, especially in mammals, mothers impart their microbiome to their children. Mike's group has shown that cells leave a genetic, an electrical imprint on cells that become parts of the offspring. So again, there's a bias in our culture and our scientific institutions to focus on the organism level, the gene. And as in biology, it's always all of the above. So I think it's not that it's not the genes, it's we need to really think about these other systems of what's being communicated from one system to the next. I don't know if any of the other panelists have a take on this as well.
No, we're all learning a lot from Mike Levin, and I think he's a fantastic bridge between the two communities. It's very inspirational and very daunting.
I see there's a comment here also from Aaron about perhaps we're just limited as humans in our ability, limited in our capacity to view the systems in their totality. I think, again, Anil mentioned this, that AI is a tool, not necessarily a colleague, or at least not a colleague yet. In the Xenobot project, that's the thing. The AI is the tool to kind of show us what's possible. And often what AI or evolutionary algorithms have always been good at is not being afraid to move into the space of all possible organisms or machines and bring back successful examples of things that we might not have thought of a priori. So I think there's a lot of potential, especially for the students that are on this call, is to use these new state-of-the-art AI tools to go out there and bring back from morphospace or robospace, space of all possible organisms, the space of all possible robots, things that human philosophers, human engineers might not have thought of, and use that to force us to broaden our conception of, what kinds of systems can support consciousness, sentience, awareness, intelligence, planning, you name it. I think that's a real fruitful avenue moving forward. I don't need to be the only one reading Zoom chat. Any of the other panelists, I see there's more questions rolling in. If you want to grab any of these and tackle them, by all means, go for it.
Erin's asking all the really good questions. I feel like she should be on the panel.
I see Georgina's asking if xenobots feel fear, sadness, happiness, and or other emotions. I would, with respect, rephrase that into how can we rule out that they don't? And I mean that as is that a question that we could operationalize? Could we test it empirically? Maybe not. And again, Anil spoke about this. I think at the moment we have to assume, humility and assume that we can't rule those things out.
I think you're touching on an interesting question here. How can we, are our scientific methods suitable for answering questions about intelligence, about how brain works, how embodiment, how bodies shape that, I mean, there's a quite provocative paper by Conrad Cording asking whether whether a neuroscientist could understand a microprocessor playing a computer game. So and it's not clear whether we could actually infer what such a simple machine is doing. So never that much understanding of brain intelligence and all these very abstract concepts.
Yeah, it's quick. It's amazing how quickly we descend into pure philosophy when we're having discussions like this, right? So Demian asked, right, whether there's a distinction between experience and or consciousness and emotions, and I think it's a great question, right? How do you and riffing off of Josh, how do you empirically measure an emotion? I'll ask some of my neuroscientist friends, but I think Josh might be right. It's just awareness all the way down. I'm going to borrow that phrase, by the way.
But of course, you could also kind of try to say, well, one of you on this call mentioned that I only understand something if I can build it. So, maybe that could be our benchmark, right? If you can build a system that is, again, going back to also maybe the Turing test, and can we build a system that is indistinguishable? And again, because we are talking about embodied intelligence, I would argue that you would have to build a body that would be indistinguishable in the way it moves, and not only in the way it communicates via a chat or something of this sense.
So I would say that, that old adage that we don't understand it unless we can build it. One of the things that I'm learning is it's not so obvious who the we is anymore. So in my work with the Levin Lab, we built an AI and the AI built xenobots. I mean, I'm not a biologist. I don't understand the xenobot, and the humans plus the AI built something that we don't understand. And obviously, in terms of AI in general, we've now entered into this phase where we're creating machines that create machines that create machines, and it doesn't take long for us to lose the plot. So, what does it mean for us as a scientific community to understand something? Even that's getting a little tricky to define.
Although for what you mentioned, it's a necessary, but not it's a necessary, not a sufficient condition, right? The fact that we can build it doesn't mean we understand, but if we don't understand, we can't build it, or maybe not. But
point, absolutely. We've got 2 minutes left. Giacomo, and do you have other things you wanted to add or tackle some of these questions?
Just another provocative statement. Sorry, maybe it'll bring even more questions. But in addition to the body, we were talking about feelings. I think if there is no internal drive or motivation, then it's also, I think that's an important component to bring in awareness or feelings. If it's just something that's programmed to carry out a specific task, and it doesn't care if it's going to be switched off or if it's going to run out of juice, I don't think it's going to be enough for this system to exhibit cognitive or other types of higher level intelligence features.
Thank you. Agreed. I believe we are out of time. I will let the organizers chime in if they have any procedural notes. I just wanted to say that this has been a great discussion, and I can see that there are many more questions and comments in chat. As we all know, Zoom chat disappears when Zoom disappears. So for the technically inclined folks on the call, if people want to copy and paste those into the Discord, at least we'd have a record of these. Thanks very much, and thanks to the other panelists, and thanks to everyone for asking great questions. Josie, I see you've unmuted your video. Are you going to tell us what to do next?
I was just going to say thank you very much, Josh, and all the panelists so far. And as you said, Josh, we now have a 15-minute coffee break before the next plenary talk. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Oh, and also, if any of the panelists would be free to stay around from the discussion at the end of the day at 4:30 GMT, that would be great to see you back again.